Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen Haupt, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet, our president. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Colleen.
I'm good to be back here in the studio with you.
Always. Sometimes we have these little lulls while I'm on different mission trips, but it's always good when we're back in the office together and we can have these wonderful conversations.
Exactly. And for all of our listeners, we're going to be talking today about pets and children. So basically this idea that's been going on in society recently where people are treating their pets like children and they're not having children because they have their pets. And why would they need children? That's the mentality going on. So we're going to be discussing that. But before we jump into that, Father, did you grow up with pets? I'm just kind of curious what background you're coming from in this discussion.
Sure. Well, I grew up in South Louisiana, as many of our audience would be aware, and on a farm. So yes, we grew up around animals all the time. We definitely had pets, and which were very much a part of our daily life. I mean, so it's definitely have an affinity toward the companionship of dogs, and currently my dad still has a number of those animals on the farm right now that we never had inside animals.
Oh, interesting.
So we always had, they were always outside. And so, but they were very much a part of us. And I mean, we often sometimes make a reference, to some of the animals we've had over the years and how long we had some of these pets. So no, very much so. And even before coming to HLI, I actually had some friends, one of their children was moving and needed a place, for their pet, which was an indoor pet, and so I ended up taking care of that pet for actually quite a few months. A dog,
okay,
and to the point where the dog at one point did not want to go back, and so it liked where it was living. So absolutely.
Yeah. We grew up with cats in our house, so I was never as much into dogs. They kind of scared me as a kid, but definitely love cats.
Yeah,
so
we have cats on the farm, but they're definitely hunters and outdoor. They sleep among the horses and the cattle. And my dad often speaks about one who's recently just a great hunter. But we had more dogs than we had cats.
Yeah. Well, what got me thinking about this and wanting to do an episode on it was in one of your recent articles, you were talking about Pope Francis and remarks he made recently about declining birth rates that are going on. And he made a comment I was reading the remarks he made, and he was talking about how, I think this would have been at the end of this past April, two different experiences within the same time frame in St. Peter's Square where people came and they had a dog in a baby stroller, or someone was Your Excellency, or I guess, let's see. Yeah. Whatever you address the Pope as, Your Holiness. Yeah. Your Excellency is the bishop.
Right.
They went, Your Holiness, will you bless my baby? And he looked at it and it was a dog. And he was like, oh my gosh, no. So anyway, there was that experience that he had. So then he remarked on it. And then you mentioned it in your article. And I was like, that's an interesting, you see it all over American culture. You see my child has paws. And I thought we could just address it. So why do you think this is occurring in today's society?
Well, I think it would be great, Colleen, just to use the Holy Father's words himself, because he's really speaking to an issue that I think so many people are not maybe considering in the conversation. And this is what he says. He noted that, we are, with the falling birth rates, are a sign of an underlying spiritual disease. He says, quote, "The challenge of natality, being open to children, is a matter of hope." And I think that, what we here are talking about is that so many within our society, the way they approach this, so they're approaching it from hearing the culture makers, it's the language of the day. And what do we hear? And we've heard now for decades, a growing population. The planet cannot sustain the population. Also, we have to acknowledge the fact that sadly many people are coming from wounded family situations. They're coming from broken homes, or they're coming from different wounded moments of life. And so their experience of family and children are very different. And so I like how our Holy Father is approaching. He's saying that children are always been in every age a sign of hope, a belief in that there's something to invest in tomorrow. And I think that's the way to approach the subject, is to look at it, what has brought someone to make a decision. Now, here we're talking about people who have fully intended not to welcome a child.
Yeah.
Right? That's very
Again,
different.
that's why I wanted to clarify that we did grow up with animals and that
Correct.
we're not against pets.
Correct.
And we're not against, like, animals
Exactly.
are a great gift from God, but
Exactly.
they aren't humans. And your dog doesn't replace your child.
Exactly, and we know that in anyone that's had pets and has pets, we know that the emotions they can also evoke from us, and the fact of enjoyment that they bring into many people's lives, and we see that in so many ways, especially among children and among the elderly and some of the handicapped. But we can give prime examples of how beautiful they can serve and how they can also be of emotional benefit to people. We see that. So, but here, what the Holy Father is making note of is the full intent for a married couple, to close themselves off, to the beauty of human life, the beauty of welcoming a child and children, and the beauty of believing that not only do you want to open your heart to life, but you also believe in tomorrow, and that you are wanting to share this life with your children and their children's children and so forth. And so he really does make this, he says it's not an illusion. This hope is not an illusion, but it's an optimism. It's believing in something more. And so I think that's an important point the Holy Father makes.
I also liked how when I was going through it, he was talking about how, let me find it here. Talking about hope is associated with practical choices. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it, is it's not just like this, like, oh, feel good about the future. It's like, no, I have hope in the future. And even though the future is uncertain, I'm still going to have children.
Right.
But it was interesting because when we were preparing for this, I was telling you before the podcast started, it made me think of something I read in Plutarch's Lives in college, where it was Caesar in Rome. So, like, I don't know, this was early, like around the time of Christ. I don't know if it was BC or AD. Caesar saw people that were from a different country, and they had monkeys and dogs, and they're like holding them close and petting them. And he's like, do women have no children in your part of the world? Like, why are you treating this animal as a child? And then Plutarch follows it, a truly imperial reproof to those who waste on animals the affection which they ought to bestow on mankind. And I thought that was really interesting, that even it's the same situation as Pope Francis. You have Rome 2,000 years apart, and like people are still treating like animals as their children, and just that idea that there's a certain affection that we're supposed to bestow on humans that's not fitting towards animals. Right. And I thought it's like human nature hasn't changed. Right.
It just shows, I think underneath all of it, I mean, that's what our Holy Father also makes note of, and many others who have given commentary on this, because we see this, around the world, especially in the developed world, where we're seeing, this approach, this mentality. And I think what the Holy Father is doing is he's definitely striking a nerve, because, the media, especially the secular media, picked up on this very much. When the Holy Father, encouraged people, especially Italians, who have always been associated with large families. As I said in my column, rambunctious, very large families and filled with life and wonder. But as going to Rome, where we have an office in Rome, and being in Rome many times for meetings at the Vatican, and not seeing Italian families. You see lots of tourists, you see lots of tourist children, but you don't see Italian families with children.
They don't have a lot of kids,
right.
even if it's...
And I would say the same thing when I was in Lisbon recently, and I see this in many other parts of the world. I saw it just recently in New Zealand. And for me, it's discouraging in a way. It sounds. I feel sorry. I feel a sense of loss, that we've lost a sense of the beauty of family life, the beauty of marriage, the beauty of welcoming a child, and the wonder each child brings into a family with their unique personalities and their gifts and their wonder, and to share in that, and also the world benefits in the birth of every child, And yes, there are going to be challenges in many parts of our world in the addition of a child to a family, especially in some of the underdeveloped parts of the world, and which the Holy Father doesn't really move into, but it's something that I think that affects how people approach this conversation.
He does talk about how there isn't the community to support the family.
Correct.
How, like, that was kind of a little bit like that, where it might be a challenge, but it's a challenge because there's no community support. If you're, like, I don't know, thinking about times when big families were normal and you're having a new child and, I don't know, the women of the village bring you food or whatever, like, kind of like we have meal trains now. Like, I don't actually know if that was a thing that happened in history, but I see it happening now, and I feel like human nature hasn't changed. But you have this community support, and if you're, like, alone in a city and you don't really know your neighbors, you don't have a lot of friends, and you're mostly a career person. Yeah, that would be really scary to like the idea of welcoming lots of kids would be a really scary prospect if you have no community around you.
Exactly.
And that's something that we need to encourage by having more community.
Exactly, Colleen. I mean, and if you think about, Supreme Court Justice Barrett, if people look at her large family and wonder how is it possible, for the highest, court of the nation, and yet here is this a mother, a wife who is welcomed life in her large family and has a very successful career, a successful profession. Yeah. And so it's how people approach and it's how people address. But you're absolutely right. I mean, when I was and again, not comparing, because we know that things have changed for in a way how people look at this. But when I was a younger boy, and I come from a large family structure, and but we also lived within the community. Our families lived near each other and supported each other, which is what you're talking about. This is something I see in many parts of the developing world, in Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, where people are not as mobile. They live still in communities. They work as a family. They support each other in family units. And so you had your aunts and your uncles, and you had your godmothers and your godfathers, and you had those that were married and those that were not married. And those that were not married, they became kind of the godfathers and the godmothers and the
sometimes they lived at home.
Right.
Sometimes they lived with these families and they were like the aunt that lived and helped mom out.
Right. But also, as you just mentioned, in many cases, mom today works outside the home too.
Yeah.
And so that does change. And I think all this is important for us to talk about and get people to think about as we talk about a subject, because it does affect how people approach. And so, like the Holy Father's noting, if my approach to family life is, I think the world is overpopulated, if I think that adding more children to the world is going to cause economic problems, and I approach the conversation from that, then yes, it's going to very much impact how I'm going to approach married life, how I'm going to approach human sexuality, how I approach conjugal love. It's going to affect how I approach this.
It seems like it's a symptom of like this underlying issue that's going on is you have these people that have this idea like the future is uncertain. You shouldn't really add kids. Like that's probably going to overpopulate the earth. And you have like this kind of like the hopeless mentality.
Right.
Then this is just a symptom of, I don't know. To me, it looks like people having this natural affection of like wanting to care for a living being and maybe being too afraid or too uncertain about the future and just for some reason not wanting to bestow that on a child and welcome a child into the world. So they're like, well, a dog can love me. Like I can love a dog. A dog can't really love you because they're not like, they don't have a rational soul, obviously, but just it can still evoke those feelings of affection and like it needs you. It's a living thing that needs you. And I don't know, to me, it looks like a natural desire that's been distorted because of these underlying issues.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that, when people approach it, I mean, it shows you that we want to be loved. We actually want to love. We want to care. There is something within us. I mean, if you think about how much, money is spent, on treats and toys and various things to support pets and to care for them, not just the things that they have a need for, medicines and so forth, but just the idea that how much the industry that's out there that is. And so there's within people, and I agree, is that they want to love, they want to care, they want to feel that there's something that reaches out of themselves to care for. And so those are good things. Yeah. And that's what the Holy Father, in a sense, doesn't really get into great detail, but you can hear him kind of addressing that. When he says that, he says this is something important. He says that young people live in a world in which it seems as if starting a family has turned into a titanic effort. Yeah. So it goes to this a little bit that, caring for my pet doesn't seem to be so titanic. It seems in their mind that it's manageable.
You're not paying for your dog to go to college.
So in a situation when you have all these other things of approachment affecting your way of addressing, and then your own fears, which the Holy Father talks about, and says that if I have a sense of fear that I can't do this, or if I come from very difficult family backgrounds.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If you come from a broken family and you're like, this,
I don't want to
that
do
was
that.
hard. I don't
Right.
want to bestow that on someone else.
And all these things add together, then this is how someone approaches it. And I think what the Holy Father is helping to raise to the surface is it takes momentous courage. It does take courage. It takes courage to get married because, and especially in today's climate when we know that sadly many people end up in broken relationships. So that's why people choose to cohabitate, and not be married civilly or in a sacramental union, thinking, well, let's see if this works first. Let's see if this. It's a fear because of something that's affected their way of approachment.
And ironically, that fear is just making it worse.
Right.
Like that fear of the future. If you don't have children, then you're going to get to be old, and if your spouse dies, you're alone.
Well,
if you have fear of marriage and you cohabitate. And then you finally do get married, you're more likely to divorce. Like, it's just interesting how these fears that are making people approach things very cautiously are going to be what end up dooming them in the end.
Exactly.
Not dooming them, but like kind of like it can doom a relationship if you're living together before you get married. And it's just interesting that.
Well, we know what the statistics tell us, right? So it tells us that obviously people, and I don't want to get off on that subject, but
yeah, it's a different.
But it does.
But it's that same idea.
Yeah, is that that people who choose to cohabitate, there's a higher percent, and they do get married, that there's a higher percentage of divorce. So we're seeing all these numbers that tell us many things, but if we strip them down, it goes back to what you said with regard toward pet. We want to be loved, we want to love, we want to give of ourselves, and we want to sacrifice for something. We want to believe in something. So even, quote, those that are placing their energy and their focus on pets, it still requires time. It requires sacrifice. It requires a commitment. It requires the fact that, hey, this affects my vacation. It affects my going to work. In other words, all these things are affected, and that's kind of what the Holy Father is saying. Okay, let's turn this now, toward, as you mentioned, the welcoming and the loving of a child that has a rational soul that actually, contributes to the good of your family.
Love you back.
And love you back, exactly. And contributes to the life of the community and contributes to the good of society. And so these are the kinds of things. And of course, we know what happened. Much of the secular media picked up on this and we're very critical of the Holy Father. But I don't know, they're not listening, and sometimes we're so blind, that the culture makers have so controlled the conversation that, even people who maybe believe in that agenda are just so close to the possibility that there's something wrong here.
So what should we do about it? Like, how can we encourage young people to have that courage to have kids and to instill that hope? What are some practical things we can do about that?
So I do think that what we're doing today is an example. We need more of the conversation, and not from the critical point. So I don't think the Holy Father, by any means, if you read the entire message and the entire presentation he gave, and how he addresses on a couple of occasions, he wasn't being critical for the sake of criticism. He was pointing out that in Italy the birth rates are so low that that if we don't do something, that we're going to see this society that we know, this culture within Italy, continue to fade. Yeah. The Prime Minister of Japan recently made such comments. We see this in other parts of the world. And so the Holy Father is just, in a sense, ringing a bell saying, awaken. Yeah. And let's be honest about why we're approaching this. So I think what's important is to talk about the beauty of marriage. And let's be honest, as we just said, that's not how many people approach it, because as I've been writing in my articles of late on mothers and fathers, on family life, when you have so many things in the culture giving a different impression, when sadly many people are coming out of situations of woundedness and brokenness and abandonment and very painful situations in families and relationships and marriage, children who have been abandoned by their parents, so how do we recapture when many people don't have the mindset in a sense of the experience that Colleen you've had or I've had, and the fortunate experience that we had. We come from a whole family, with its joys and its pains, with its good and its difficulties. But we come from that environment. So obviously our approach is in our way of looking at family life and married life and looking at the welcoming of children is very much influenced by that. And of course, our faith and our faith tradition and our understanding of human persons.
And like the people you see around you too, like you see so many great marriages and big families in this area that it's very, even if you people haven't experienced it in their own families, they can look at, if you're in a community where that's common, you can look at it and say, oh, wow, that's beautiful. I want that. How do I get there? But if you've never seen it.
Exactly. And I think that's part of the answer is to model it.
Yeah.
And we need to do that. We need to model, not say to people, it's not a question of number. It's not a question of 5, 6, 7, 4, 3, 2. People want to I never get sidetracked on that. It's be open. And just welcome life. And
as many as God sends you.
And be open, yes.
Yeah.
And so, but that needs to be modeled. And so when you see a couple that's truly in love and you can see it and you feel it, it's attractive. And you're saying, I want that. And so we need the modeling, the example, especially in a wounded world, especially when it's not being modeled on the TV screen. It's not modeled on the big screens.
And it's been like 60 years since the sexual revolution. So you've had 60 years of generations growing up in these homes that have been wounded by that.
That's correct.
And so the modeling is so important because people have just sometimes never seen it.
Exactly. And the same thing with children. Yeah. So, and so the idea that, that children bring life, children, are a gift. They're a wonder. They're filled with awe, but I think that's what the Holy Father says, and it's a challenge. And anyone who's married, who's listening, can definitely speak more than I can on the challenges of welcoming children and raising a family. Yeah. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of sacrifice, and it requires a commitment of husband and wife, to each other and to their children, and to realize that not only is the child to be welcomed, but the child has rights too. And so that's what the Holy Father does. It's a heroic effort, but not a heroic unattainable, like it's some fairy tale that, only some can live. No, it can be lived, and it can be a life that is filled with so much joy, and to be able to watch and see your children grow and mature, and to be part of that journey, and to see them one day marry and welcome children of their own, and see your family grow. And this is something that pets cannot bring.
No.
And they bring elements of joy and elements of light, if you will, in those moments, of comfort, but not like another human being who, and I think that there's no comparison. And I think we should not, and I know we're not trying to compare. It's not a comparison at all.
But we're talking about people that are comparing them in a sense.
Correct.
That they are, we're talking about this phenomenon that people are treating animals and viewing animals as their children, and we're not trying to compare them, but other people are. And that's it's the symptom of the society.
Right.
I also feel like going back to like what we can do to encourage young people to have more children is also just trying to provide that community, like be supportive, like when children are crying at mass, be supportive of the parents, like, I think that there's a lot of practical things that we can do. Do you have anything that you would add to that?
I think you just hit it, because the Holy Father says, he says, rather than being a shared value that everyone recognizes and supports, and he makes note of that it's a titanic effort, that some people think it's so titanic that it's not able to be lived. He disagrees with that. But he also says it's a shared value. And that's what we're talking about here, is that, being raised in a family structure, raised within a family community where the community is celebrating the gift of life and the beauty of family life. And again, here in Front Royal at St. John the Baptist, or if you went to Winchester at Sacred Heart and the neighboring parishes around this community, you will experience larger families. You will see them. I was just in Hanceville, Alabama, at the Blessed Sacrament Shrine, Shrine of the Blessed Sacrament, and I was in Irondale. And, you attend daily Mass and you see large families. You see these pockets of communities, and that's why people are moving into those communities, because they want that kind of environment. They want to be in an environment where family life is welcomed and where children are seen as a blessing. And I think the difficulty as a person who travels a good bit, I've been on airplanes, and, when children come on, you can hear the kind of of people around and going, just because because guess what? Yes, the child is going to be what a child does. You try sitting a child down for 7 or 8 hours on an airplane. Yes, I don't like sitting on an airplane for 8 hours. You get unsettled. But these are children.
Yeah.
And of course, I've done this myself. I remember on a flight out of Manila heading home, and a young mom comes on the plane, and very heroic. She's got her hands full with a couple of children and a baby, and she's for some reason traveling by herself. Maybe she was visiting family back in the Philippines. Well, she's trying to manage, baby carriages and luggage and backpacks and bottles. No one helps her. Yeah. So I helped her carry things on, and then I was sitting a few seats behind, and so packed plane, and so the toddler, she's trying to take care of the baby. So when we were able to stand, I walked over and I said, "Would you like me to hold the toddler for a little while? I'm only 3 seats behind you.
Yeah.
I'm in eye contact of you, and he's in eye contact of you. I'm more than happy to hold him and give you a chance to settle in, and get the baby taken care of." The other child was already sleeping. Yeah. So she's trying, and so she's just smiling. You don't mind? I said, "No, I don't mind." So I held the toddler for a little while, and eventually then the stewardess came out and says, "Oh, Father, I'll take care of that, take care of the child." And so what it did is it kind of, in a way, I don't want to say embarrassed, but it kind of made people say, if this man is going to do
what can I do? Yeah.
What can I do? And why am I not doing something? Yeah. And I think people, what I would say is we need to recognize that we need to be of support, not critical, and help people.
And I don't know, just this is a kind of a weird thing, but the Pope Francis was talking about people not smiling, and just even just smile at families. Let them know that they're welcome, because you never know which mom is walking through the store just totally exhausted. Why is my kid acting up? And just letting her know that she's seen, and not in a seen in a you shouldn't be here, why are your children so annoying way, but just no. Good for you. Good for what you're doing.
I think both mom and dad, in airports all the time, again, I travel so much, and to see these wonderful families together, and and it's to say thank you, and not from a reaction because I don't see children, which is true in times, but to thank them for being generous, and whether I see one or I see 3 or I see 5 or I see 6, just to say thank you. And it's amazing to see the smiles of the dad and the mom, and just, not just because I'm paying attention to the child, but just to say, thank you, for being generous. Thank you for what a beautiful gift, what a beautiful blessing. And, and that's part of the community too. And that's why the Holy Father is just making note of this. And also what I think is so beautiful is children, do evoke from us a sense of joy in life.
Yeah.
A child.
They're so joyful.
Exactly. And I think that we see this with our elderly. We see it with, different segments of our population. I remember in the nursing home back home, we would invite families to come periodically for special days, because many of our elderly brothers and sisters, they may not have had any grandchildren living in the community or been able to see them on a regular basis. The smiles that would come from these beautiful souls just to be among children and just to be able to touch them and to hear them laugh. And nothing's more beautiful than to hear a child laugh and the wonder of that laugh. And I think that's part of encouragement too. So we have to model. So you asked early, we have to model it. So we need our families to keep modeling family life and to model fidelity in marriage. In a world that doesn't see fidelity.
Well, and that's back in, I think it was April, we released the episode with Maria Jones from the UK. And she has her YouTube channel, and she goes all around the UK and interviews different families. And they're just the most beautiful videos. I could watch them all day long. They're just all about family life. And they talk about different topics, but she just makes family life, she doesn't make family look joyful. Right. She shows how joyful family life is. Right. And that was... we just need more of that. We need more models of people being able to look at it and not be oh, that's old fashioned, or oh, that's terrible, or oh, that poor mother is she might be worn out, but to recognize that there's this beauty and this joy there.
That's right. And I think about so many examples that we that are out there. And we need to see them. We need to see the different ways and expressions of that family life. And with its, parents who are having difficulties because they have sickly children, or maybe they have children of special need. And but to see their sacrificial love, to see their attention and attentiveness to their children is inspiring. It's encouraging. And many of the world look at that and say, "Oh my goodness, those poor parents." But when you talk to the parents, and they're filled with wonder, it's what a privilege it is to serve these children and to be able to be in their lives. People are kind of caught off guard because that's not what they're expecting to hear.
Yeah.
But that's the modeling. That's the example.
Change the narrative.
And not to be afraid. The Holy Father doesn't mention it in that same phrase, be not afraid, but that's what he's saying. Don't be afraid of this. Don't be afraid of something so natural. It's natural to want children. It's natural for a husband and wife who share intimate love and what we call conjugal love, and to want a child, to welcome a child. It's the very fruit of their love. It's the very fruit from the act of their love that can occur and does occur. And not to be afraid of it, and not to be afraid of the demand that the child will have and absolutely will have, and not to be afraid of that, and to do it with a big smile. And to do it and know that you're not alone, that you have, and that's again where the rest of the family has to come in, and to be of support and to realize that we all are in this. I have great nieces and great nephews. I'm very fortunate to have, closeness to my family, and where I can be of help to them. I am. The Lord has blessed me. Why would I not use those blessings to bless others?
Like, we're not supposed to be these isolated orbs moving through society. Like, we're supposed to be in this interconnected community. And that's like you're put in a family, and then your family has family, and you're put in this community where you're supposed to have these relationships. Right. And he talks about this, like how sad and depressing it is to just have such isolation that like you're disconnected from the people around you. Right. And yeah, I really enjoyed reading his remarks, because it was just, he so well was able to capture that sadness and that grayness and that isolation of living this hopeless life where you're afraid to welcome children versus like the joy of welcoming children. And like that, like you quoted John Paul II with the "do not be afraid," or "don't be afraid, be not afraid." I'll quote Benedict XVI with the "dare to be great."
Right.
It's like dare to have the children, dare to face the future. And he admits it. He's like, the future is uncertain. It's not that it might be uncertain. It is uncertain.
Right.
And just dare to have that family.
And many generations before us has faced all those challenges and all those difficulties. And
that's why we're here.
That's right, exactly. Because our parents said yes.
Yeah.
Our parents said, we are open, and our parents were willing to fight the good fight, and willing to dare, to embrace the uncertainties of tomorrow that every child brings. Yeah. Every child brings, and every situation brings. Because life is filled with uncertainties. But we're not led to despair or hopelessness. We're led to the joy of the challenge and the wonder. What Pope Benedict also said. Exactly. And and I think that part of it is also a misplaced compassion, if I may say that. That people who choose, to in a sense of replace the welcoming of a child with a pet. I think, as we already said, there's lots of fear, there's lots of confusion, maybe experiences, woundedness so much, but also in times it's a misplaced compassion in the sense, because it's compassion. They care for this animal. They sincerely sacrifice many things to make sure that there's food, make sure that they're cared for. Those are good things, but in a sense, to be open to share, with a human life, that actually will return that love and can return that love and can do it in a way that the heart is made for.
Yeah.
Right. And these wonderful gifts of God that God has given us. I always used to joke with my mom. I still joke with my mom. So we raised lots of horses, and my dad has a great love of horses and still works with them and trains them and on a daily basis. And I always tell my mom, and she says, you spend more time with those horses than you do with me. And I said, you probably should never ask him, does he love them more than you? You might not always like the answer, but the idea is that, there's a proper place.
Yeah.
And my dad understands, very clearly. And we were taught that as well, so that these beautiful gifts of God of creation, these wonderful pets. Horses in many ways are pets. And, the cows were there for food and for milk and the horses were there for work, in many ways, but they were also there for our enjoyment. And so they were pets, but we know their proper place. These are blessings of God.
They are.
They're beautiful blessings of God.
But they don't supersede humans. And that's the only thing that's the real problem here.
Exactly.
Is there's no problem with having animals and loving animals and having that compassion for animals.
Exactly.
But when you use an animal to replace a person, that's when it starts becoming problematic.
That's right.
So,
and I think that's what the Holy Father was really talking about, especially, again, going back to low birth rates. Of course, that's what he's really addressing here.
Yeah, the demographic winter.
Exactly. And looking at the mindset, the approachment, and what we are seeing in media, what we're seeing in society, what I call the culture makers, creating a language and a narrative that's brought us to this moment. And yet, just a few decades before, as I note my column, and when you have these large, rambunctious Italian families, and now today they're few and far between. And so that's what the Holy Father is looking at. And I think it's really a bell that's being rung, and we need to listen. And not be afraid of having this kind of conversation and being labeled. Oh, it's just that this is the only way. Which goes to your question: how do we change it? We have to have this conversation and not be afraid of it, and not to be ashamed of promoting family life, not to be ashamed of promoting generosity in marriage and openness to children. And at the same time, I have to step forward. And to be of support to families. And the church has to be of support to families. And families need to support families. And community needs to support families. And I think we need to talk about more of the economic situation, because that's another fear.
That's a whole other topic, but it's definitely something he addresses.
It affects all this. He does. I mean, when you talk about a loaf of bread costing what it does, or a gallon of milk what it does, and we all know, how do I provide for my family when economically it's very difficult, and it's so we need to look as a society, which you and I have had in this podcast on a few occasions talking about that. We need to address those things. That's how we change this conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Father, for having this conversation today. I'm glad that we got a chance to use this situation that he brought up to have this discussion about like the beauty of family life and how we need to welcome children.
And let's pray for our families, and let's pray for those that for whatever reason that may be in the direction thinking that I'm just going to I'm going to have a pet and I'm going to care for the pet and not going to be open to life. Let's pray for for people in the situation, and especially those that are motivated by fear, hopelessness, discouragement, or maybe as misplaced compassion, or as the Holy Father does note, just have bought into the culture maker's narrative. Yeah, and there are many people out there. Yeah, so let's keep all of that in prayer.
Yes, thank you, Father.
Thank you, Colleen.
And to all of our listeners, please like, follow, subscribe. Drop any ideas for future podcasts in the comments if you're interested, and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.